Comets from humble origins and eyes on ISON. So we're going to talk about comets because there is, of course, Comet ISON coming through past the sun at the end of this month. And there is the great question, is it going to be the comet of the century? And the first question you have to ask about that is, well, what does comet of the century mean? There is actually no scientific definition for a comet of the century, so let me take you through back through the centuries to give you some idea of what the great comets are. First stop is about 1,000 years ago in 1066. Now, what happened in 1066? Thank you. Battle of Hastings, okay? Everybody goes, oh, I remember that. I had to memorize that for my high school history test, right? In the Battle of Hastings in 1066. Also, in 1066 was an appearance of a comet. And this is recorded on the Bayeux Tapestry, which is this 270-foot long embroidered cloth giving the entire history of the Norman invasion of England in 1066. And of course, since the victors get to write the history books, the passage of the comet in April and May of that year was deemed a bad omen for Harold of England because he lost the battle and actually died in the Battle of Hastings in October of that year. The cool thing about this is actually a passage of Comet Halley, although it wasn't actually called Comet Halley until about 700 years later. Fast forward 500 years, and we do the Great Comet of 1577. And here you can see it has this great big long tail stretching here. It's depicted in this woodcut stretching across the city of Prague. We also get these giant tails, the Great Comet of 1680. All right, notice the phrasing, Great Comet of about a year that's 100 years later. And this is, you can see its amazing tail over the city of Rotterdam in the Netherlands. Next up, we have the Great Comet of 1843. Again, this is a woodcut depicted as it is over the Kent in England. Now, in the late 1800s, we didn't have to do woodcuts and paintings. We actually got photography. So the earliest photograph I could find was of the Great Comet of 1882 from the South African Astronomical Observatory. And of course, as an early photograph, you don't get much detail in it, but it's cool that we now can really see what they look like rather than just relying on artists' impressions. We also have that for 1910, Comet Halley. Again, relatively early photograph, so you're seeing not the great sweep of it, but you're seeing all sorts of cool detail from a Harvard plate that was taken in, this was taken in Peru. Well, there are some, of course, recent ones that show these great big tails. Here's one from 1976, Comet West, and you can see that those woodcuts really weren't faking it. The comet tails really can stretch across 10s and 20s and 30 degrees of the sky. We had some really great comets in the 1990s. The one with the longest tail, I was told, is 1996 in Comet Hyakutake. And the ion tail on this was measured to be about 550 million kilometers long. Longest tail. That's several astronomical units. Now, of course, this picture doesn't, of course, encapsulate the whole tail, but that's what they tell me, that it set the record for the longest tail. Finally, we have some in relatively recent years. 2011, this is Comet Lovejoy, and again, you can see this amazing tail stretching across the sky. Anybody see Comet Lovejoy? 1, 2, fantastic. You must have gone down to the southern hemisphere because it was a southern hemisphere comet. All right, we didn't get any. We've had 2 great comets in this century. Both of them have been visible only from the southern hemisphere, have not been able to see from the northern hemisphere. This, by the way, is the lights of Santiago in Chile underneath Comet Lovejoy. So if you go to Wikipedia, there's a list of great comets, and it gives you sort of a feeling of the various comets over the centuries and some of their names. But of course, it's not that terribly scientific. It's Wikipedia. That's what do you expect? Slightly more scientifically, or much more scientifically, is a list compiled by Don Yeomans called Great Comets in History, in which he finds 71 comets over the last 2,400 years. I actually updated that to be 72 with Comet Lovejoy in 2011 because he did his work in April 2007. In this list, there are 22 appearances of Comet Halley, while no other comet appears more than once. So that gives you an idea of just how important Comet Halley has been in our understanding and development of comets. Well, the characteristics gleaned from his notes are that their tails can be up to 100 degrees long, that some are so bright that they become visible during daylight while the sun is still up. And many of them appear to be sun grazers. And sun grazers mean that they come very, very close to the sun. Their orbits bring them real close to the sun. I'll show you a couple of those in a few minutes. Because they pass close to the sun, the stability of the comets are in question, and several of these comets have actually broken into pieces. They were observed that after they passed by the sun, they broke into 2, 3, or 4 pieces. And in particular, there is a particular family of comets that appears to be a source of several great comets. It's called the Comets family. And it's a family of sun grazers that was noticed by astronomers that several of the comets, there are now 9 comets that have the similar orbits. All right, if you trace back their orbits, all 9 of these comets have similar orbits. And so the postulation is that there was a much larger comet that broke into a lot of smaller comets hundreds of years ago. And these comets here in the Comets family are all the pieces of that much larger comet. And of the Comets family, the 5 here that I've got bold in yellow, 1843, 1882, 65, that's Ikeya Seki, 1970, and 2011, which is Lovejoy, have all been great comets. So the Comets family has a bunch of cometary royalty in it, in the Comets family of comets. Now, what's also interesting is statistics, and it goes sort of the way you might think. You know, up until the Renaissance, there's only 1 or 3 each century, you know, relatively incomplete. But you start getting more as we start paying more attention, although the 1700s, there are still only 2. But in the 1800s and the 1900s, you get 8 and 9. And as I said, we've already had 2 in the 2000s. So the phrase comet of the century doesn't really apply because on average, we sort of get one once every decade. Of course, in the media, calling it Comet of the Decade doesn't sound so amazing, so Comet of the Century is probably going to stay in our modern media. Now, which one of these was the greatest comet? I can tell you without hesitation, the greatest comet is the one you see yourself. All right? Because you can see all the pictures that you want, but the one that you see with your own eyes is really the greatest comet. It's such a wonderful experience. And for me, that was Comet Hale-Bopp in 1997. All right? I was at the Columbia University at that time. I was living in Columbia University housing at 113th Street in Manhattan. And I come out of the apartment building, and I look down the street. Now, I'm 7 blocks from the Hudson River. Okay, I'm far away from the Hudson River, and there's all these city lights. And what do I see hanging there between the buildings over the Hudson? I saw Comet Hale-Bopp. And that was a really powerful experience to me. Now, of course, being a geek, I immediately just walked straight down to the river and saw it, you know, over the lights of New Jersey. But being able to see Comet Hale-Bopp with the lights of the city was a very powerful experience to me. And it was certainly my favorite, the brightest and most impression I've had of a comet in my lifetime. Hopefully, Comet ISON will surpass it, or some other comet, because I'd hate it if the best comet I ever saw is already in my past.